Welcome back to Open Door Philosophy, the podcast that's so warm and inviting, it'll make your heart feel as full as a Thanksgiving feast. I'm your host, Eric Parsons, and I'm here to guide you through the bounties and blessings of philosophical thought.
Busy spreading holiday cheer. I'm Taylor, the resident spirit of gratitude and generosity at Open Door Philosophy.
I'm Andrew, the congested philosophical pilgrim who's always ready to share a story about political philosophy.
And welcome to episode 71. We're going to take a journey through the philosophical cornucopia, where we'll discover the ingredients for what makes the most just political system. But first, guys, how's it going? But wait a minute, Andrew, you're just filled with the Thanksgiving spirit, it seems, when you wrote this.
Yeah, I have a confession. This is not Andrew's writing. This is ChatGPT.
No.
Oh.
I fed it our past few themed episodes, and it came up with this. Isn't that great?
That's right. No, I thought it was funny. I mean, it's kind of awkward, but that's that's why it's funny. Okay.
I thought it was pretty cool.
So ChatGPT wrote our intro, everyone. Yeah, let us know how you thought it was. All right, Taylor, how's it going?
Good. I'm on break. Thank goodness. Trying to mentally prepare for the busiest probably 3 weeks of the semester when I get back to school, because we have a week and a half of class and then a week of finals and stuff, wrapping everything up. So it's gonna be crazy, but good. I'm back on my grandma hobbies of crocheting and reading. I ventured to Barnes & Noble over the weekend, got a new book, even though I have a lot of unread books.
Mm-hmm.
But gotta do what you gotta do. The Nightingale.
Oh, I've heard of this.
That sounds familiar. Who's
It's
that by?
supposed to be good. Kristen Hanna. It's about two sisters during World War II that get separated and their own separate journeys. And I think it kind of flashes between present, after the war and during.
Cool. You're at Barnes & Noble? You should have messaged me. We're going to meet for lunch and talk about books or something.
We need to. We need to all get a pumpkin cream cold brew or whatever the winter equivalent is.
Yeah, we do. A
sugar cookie.
Speaking of,
except Andrew's mysteriously out of town. Oh, Andrew has a Starbucks. Look at that.
What did you get?
cappuccino.
Delish.
Yeah, no winter drinks until I return.
All right. Well, how are you, Andrew?
Doing good. I'm also on break now. Yeah. I graded about 200 papers on
Oh my
Friday.
gosh.
So we got the day off, and all the teachers in our district who taught the same subject came together, swapped papers, and graded for 8 or 9 hours. It was ridiculous, but a lot of fun.
Sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I don't feel so bad, now with my 13 essays I have to grade over the break.
Yeah, but I finished. Done.
Yeah,
So that's
good for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
How are you?
Very nice.
Oh, I am great. I am also on break. This is the first day of it. Kind of. Do y'all count the weekends when you're on break? Some people say so this is Monday. They're like, this is the first day of break. I'm always like, first day of break was Saturday.
Yeah, I agree. It's really Friday.
Yeah.
Friday night.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, Friday night. Anyway,
yeah.
Yes, I'm on break and I'm having a great time because I'm doing nothing. I'm doing nothing except trying to find my stupid cat in the middle of the night who got out of the house.
Uh-oh.
But anyway, that's a whole story. Also, I went for a walk this morning and it rained on me. So but it was nice, It was a nice rain. It was a nice rain. Got very wet. But, it wasn't cold or wind whipping around or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, a nice steady rain. Anyway, I'm on break. I don't care. This is great. Life is good.
That's great.
I have a question that we can toss around.
Okay.
When is the appropriate time to decorate for Christmas?
Oh.
I feel like it's very timely.
Day after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
I don't know that I care enough to really, throw down about this. The day after Thanksgiving is a very it's a perfectly fine time because everyone's on break. There's time to do it. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm okay with like the week before Thanksgiving. I think I'm good with that.
Mm,
What about you, Taylor?
interesting.
Yeah,
I think
how about you?
Thanksgiving has to pass. In my perfect world, it would be when December starts. But since I've gone to college, we decorate like after Thanksgiving before I go back to school. And that's like the last week of November. But there's a lot of people that are very passionate about like November decorating for Christmas. And I just don't get that.
Yeah, it's the
Like,
loss of
why?
traditional culture, but
That's right, Andrew. You go.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was at the grocery store yesterday, and they were playing "Here Comes Santa Claus" on the speakers.
I was listening to my 40s playlist, and it was taken over by just old Christmas tunes since
Bing
October.
Crosby, 1940s.
Yep.
I
That
love
fits
that.
your vibe, though.
I love that you're just
Yeah.
like, that's my playlist, 1940s.
On the radio, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know if we're going to settle that one. I feel like Thanksgiving, though, is a very acceptable time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all agree.
Yeah. Hey, look, we all agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
My dog is barking. I need to
Right,
go.
here.
Look
Yeah,
at
go
that.
check. Pause the video.
Okay, we're back to recording.
Okay. All right. Well,
Okay.
Andrew, do you want to remind us about some things?
Sure. Yeah, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're interested in watching us live. What else? What's our email?
Oh, you know.
Contact at opendoorphilosophy.com.
Yeah, you can contact us at contact@opendoorphilosophy.com. Also, for our podcast, we'd love for you to rate our podcast and subscribe. It's all really very helpful to what we do.
Yeah. Share us with your friends. If you have questions, you can send them on our Instagram as well, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, guys, this one's yours. I'm just going to sit here and provide witty banter as we go along. So off you go.
Okay, so let's just go through these three people first,
Okay.
and then
Well, what's
we
our
can
episode about, guys?
We're talking.
Poor Andrew.
We are covering more modern political philosophy today. So, last episode, we talked about kind of very early political philosophy where things kind of get started. And this week, we're going to flip to about the 1900s and talk about some of the big political philosophers of that age.
So we're getting really modern.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really modern.
most of
And
these
we'll
people
mainly-
just died, in fact.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
recently.
Nozick died a couple months ago, didn't he?
I think 2002, but
Oh, okay. I was
Yeah.
thinking of someone else.
yeah. Frankfurt, maybe. Anyways, I actually don't know about. Well, I guess yeah. All of these philosophers were somewhat American. Strauss moved to the U.S., but the other two were born here, and I think that's the first time we've ever had an episode of completely, basically American philosophers, which is pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So who are we talking about today?
Transcendentalism episode.
Yeah, maybe that.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
And we did one on pragmatism. This is
Yeah.
the first time we've had like multiple from
Yeah,
America.
that's true.
Yeah. All right. So who are these people? Who are we talking about?
We are talking about Leo Strauss, John Rawls, and Robert Nozick today.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I think these people are the ones who are most associated, at least in the philosophy of politics. Political philosophy is
Political
really
philosophy.
big players in the 20th century, all in reaction to themselves and, of course, the past of political philosophy, but also World War II, Marxism, fascism, and all of these things. And of course, the inequalities that were going emergent and recognition in the 20th century. So it'll be interesting. Okay, better.
Way better.
All
All
right,
right.
I
Well,
guess
who's
we
good?
can just start with the background. What does that sound?
Yeah,
Sounds great.
sounds good.
Taylor, do you want to lead us with Leo Strauss'
Yeah,
background?
I can just talk about his background, or do we want to dive into some of his thoughts?
We could just do all of it. Yeah.
Okay. So Strauss, like Andrew said, was born in Germany in 1899, and then he moved to the US in 1932. He taught at a handful of schools, but I think most notably was University of Chicago in the political science kind of area. His two big essays that I'm most familiar with are What is Liberal Education and What is Political Philosophy. And I think in a lot of ways, he has kind of an Aristotelian like vibe to him, for lack of a better word. He talks kind of about the teleological function of education and that culture is similar to agriculture, that it's something we have kind of a natural capacity for, but it has to be developed through education. And he talks about the necessity of education in the classics specifically, that we need to return to all of these old thinkers to remediate ourselves from the mass culture. And as I was preparing for this, I thought, like, he definitely sounds like Aristotle, but his critique of like mass media and almost like the mass man reminded me of like the Nietzschean critique, or the critique that a lot of existentialists at this time are bringing up. So I thought we could talk about that and like, how does mass culture impact us? Is that like positive or negative, or is there kind of some in between? And like, get y'all's thoughts on that.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting to me about this particular question is when he wrote, right? So he moved to
Mm-hmm.
America in, you said 1932. So that's in between the wars.
Mm-hmm.
That's Great Depression. And I don't know when he wrote about mass society, but that whole era, especially, in the 1920s, is when advertising really just exploded as far
Yeah.
as advertising techniques. It's also like certain things were available to people in America, vacuum cleaners and washers and just all these things that they were advertising for. And, you think like all of that compared to today would be far less. And so it's interesting to me that he's writing about these issues about mass media.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if the U Chicago around this time had a lot of really famous economists. So I'm wondering
Hmm.
if he was influenced by their thought. The big one that stands out is Milton Friedman, but I think he's a little bit later. But
Yeah,
I
I'm
know
not
U
sure.
Chicago has a great economics program in the
Hmm.
1950s, 60s.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's something that like kind of my classes have converged on, is like mass culture and Aristotelian notions of like self and the way that we relate to each other and how that's impacted by like the modern world. And I think it's interesting that there's all these benefits potentially of having a world that's so interconnected, but we kind of miss them because of like, I don't know, how desensitized it makes us to stuff, and like how we're just bombarded by things like advertisements even more than we already were before social media was so prevalent.
Yeah. So what does Strauss say about it? Like, is this a problem that we need to overcome?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, to Strauss, this is a big problem. I think he talks about it in both of these essays. They kind of come to the same point, that mass culture is a problem, that it develops something of a low culture where there's no like price for entry, which I think when explored that could come to like potentially some like distinguishes between like class, but that you don't need to be educated to be part of the like low like modern or mass culture, that there's no importance put on like knowing the classics and being well versed in things,
Mm, mm,
and
mm-hmm.
that that's a part of modern democracy, and that can raise a problem because now you have all of these people who don't really have an understanding of the political process that are making decisions for the government when they may not have like a full scope. And so that's why we need a liberal education in things like the classics to liberate us from mass culture, and that should be done by people who know more than us. There's like a leadership of the old to the young and things like that.
That's really interesting. Andrew, didn't Plato talk about that as well? Am I right or wrong on that? Like basically the uneducated
Mm-hmm.
masses.
Yeah, that's a thing in Plato and
Yeah.
Aristotle as well.
Yeah.
That's a critique of democracy that I think both of them
Mm-hmm.
put forward in the sense that why should everyone have a fair and equal decision if not everyone's gonna want to have the time to spend thinking about policy positions, and secondly, other people just might not be smart or qualified enough to rule a country.
Yeah, like
Yeah, this certainly
tyranny of
can
the
come off as
masses.
elitist. Does he address that in any sort of way?
I don't know. I've only read small snippets of his work. I think like these essays are part of a larger book and I just have read chapters, but I would be really interested to see what he says about that and if he does. That'd be
I
something we can
I
come
think
back
on the
to.
face of it, I mean, just because it's elitist doesn't provide a critique of it. It
Mm-hmm.
can be both
Oh,
Yeah.
agreed.
elitist and true. Uh,
Right.
I agree that it's elitist, but I think this is off-putting is it is an interesting argument at least,
Yeah.
and I don't really know what to do with it other than saying maybe more people who participate in a system generally get a right outcome,
Mhm.
but I don't know if that's true.
Yeah. And I think you could also see it as like an argument to increase the amount of people that are actually educated in things, like that have the capacity and the knowledge to think critically and make more informed decisions.
Oh, totally. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, this is going to sound bad too, but do you think that that's a good trade-off for society to have? I don't know. I'm not taking a position one way or other on this. I'm just throwing this out as a question. But would you rather have a society who's educated to like 85% of the population is educated to an average of like 70% education or 60% education, but that's kind of the bar limit for society, or a society where 30% of the population is educated to a 90% degree? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Mhm.
it does. Well, I don't know which is better. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
It's all this like goes back to, I guess, what Strauss is saying about the importance of education
Mhm.
system. You have to have an educated citizenry to have a democracy, or at least one that
Mhm.
functions well. And the good question is like, well, okay, so what should that education consist of? And I don't know what we consider educated. I think it's interesting in the United States that it's about 30 to 33% of people in the United States have a bachelor's degree.
Mhm.
And so, if that's a measure that we're saying is valuable, I'm not saying that we are, but if that's a measure that we're saying is valuable, then only a third of our population has a full college education. But I'm a big fan of the classic. This is kind of an argument about the classic books, the great books, the
Mhm.
great ideas, all these types of things, which of course receives a lot of blowback for, because it's very Western. Doesn't have to be, but it's usually perceived as
Mhm.
very Western. And there's something to be said for the value of contemporary literature and work that's being done. But man, I feel like for me, that I take comfort in knowing that there are certain things that I can talk about with other
Mhm.
people, and we have a common language or a common experience with that particular idea. So whether that's something from the Iliad, or whether it's something
Mhm.
from Shakespeare, or whether it's something from Charles Dickens or whatever, which is notoriously Western, all of it. But
Yeah.
but anyway, that was kind of a rant there. But yeah, as an educated citizenry is, I think, just incredibly important for a democracy to function well.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And I think from studying more of the classics in the program I'm in school, you're thinking critically and like it's teaching you how to think about things, not necessarily what to think and what conclusions to come across. But you're thinking about what does this mean in this culture? Why was the Iliad so important to the Greeks? Why was it copied by the Romans and why is it still prominent? And you get to like think critically about these ideas and also reflect on how these old books still have relevance today and like the themes we can take things away and you can still read like modern scholarship on how does Aristotle connect to today? Like why is he still relevant? I think that's important just because like it teaches you to be a little bit more critical in your thinking and that like
Mm-hmm.
ideally more people would have access to education.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a couple more notes
Oh,
on
wait. Andrew,
Strauss.
are you talking?
Yeah,
Okay, I
it's
didn't know.
okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it might be muted.
Before we move on to John Rawls, he draws a distinction between the good man and the good citizen. And he
Yeah, I
says
was interested in this. Yeah.
they're only the same in the best regime. So if you think about like an authoritarian regime, potentially a good citizen is someone that just follows all of the laws and potentially does things that we may consider immoral or amoral, and that's not going to align with a good man. And a good man in a bad regime is not going to be a good citizen. That there's an interesting dynamic. And I think that's really interesting to think about of like where is it more important to be maybe a good citizen than a good man and vice versa.
I don't have
Andrew.
much to say about this. Yeah, I don't think I have much to say about this. I mean, this just sounds like a Plato, Phaedo kind of thing, or Crito, sorry, where Socrates is refusing to run away even though he has the chance,
Yeah.
and he's been imprisoned and sentenced to death, possibly by an unjust system of government.
Mm-hmm.
Is he saying, is this an argument against a sort of authoritarian or totalitarian type of government, or is this just something he's pointing out?
I think it is like some of both probably that in this like argument it's arcing toward like what the best regime is. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember what he says specifically, but he's also critical of like modern democracy. So I would think somewhere in like a representative government or like a true democracy where it's like I don't know, informed by like educated elites probably.
Yeah. Such a tumultuous time that
Mhm.
he's writing to, again, like in
Yes.
between the wars, World War II, and then coming out of World
Mhm.
War II, you've got Stalin
Yeah.
and the rise of communism in various other countries, China, Cuba.
Mhm.
And, you see this wrestling between authoritarian and Western democracies. And
Yeah.
they you know, they saw the, I guess, for lack of a
Mhm.
better term, the damage that authoritarian or
Mhm.
totalitarian governments do. But at the same time, you see all of these problems with democracy as well and how
Mhm.
quickly it can respond to things. And there's this whole
Yeah.
consumerist business that comes along with it, capitalism that comes
Mhm.
along with it. And, the great experiment was Germany, Western Germany and
Mhm.
Eastern Germany, and the differences between those two, and especially in Berlin, the difference between those two sides were just really telling. But yeah, a fascinating time for him to be
Mhm.
writing in a very, very relevant topic.
Yeah, and to watch democracies do things that we would consider like morally unjustified, that
Yeah.
the United States did morally unjustifiable things, but also that Germany was a democratic or like republican system that voted in a fascist leader based on ideology, that rhetoric was able to captivate the people so much that they turned against like better morality to do like terrible things.
Oh yeah. I mean, back when I taught this, man, that was the thing that was most surprising to students, is that Hitler didn't come to power by
Mm-hmm.
just some coup d'etat or something like that.
Yeah.
I remember one of his famous quotes is, "We must destroy democracy with the weapons of democracy."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's what they did. It was all completely, well, not completely legitimate.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were like threatening people in the streets and stuff, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, democratic functioning is
Mm-hmm.
what placed him in power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say extra, which is something I've said a lot, but there was definitely a lot of shady backroom deals in Hitler's rise, and that's no different in
Mm-hmm.
any other democracy too. So I don't know if
Oh
that
yeah.
is
Yeah.
that's just a feature of it or a bug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Things to be aware of. And I guess the last thing to stay on Strauss, and then we can move on, is that he really advocated for the necessity of making value judgments in social science, that you can't be entirely objective. You have to choose and you have to use your own like faculties to make judgments, and that when those things aren't made, you kind of miss bits of social phenomenon in a way that you don't in science, and that believing scientific knowledge is the highest form of knowledge depreciates pre-scientific knowledge, and that like puts a lesser value on things like social science from before, if you think of like the classics or like pre-Socratic thinkers and like today. And he's really critical of historicism because it rejects value judgments.
So, say a little more about that value judgment. I'm interested in that, but I don't know what to do with it. Like,
Yeah.
is there an example?
Let me pull up my notes from that and see what he says.
Would the equivalent just be like, instead of saying, okay, this is how many people participate in a democracy versus a aristocracy versus a dictatorship, democracy is the best form of government, making that claim, which is something that science naturally can't do.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the idea?
I'm honestly not sure. What I have is that in historicism's rejection of value judgments, it advocates for like the insolubility of values and it can't be rationally adjudicated. He references Max Weber
Hmm.
in this, and that saying all knowledge is valued denies the fact value distinction. Yeah, I'm not really sure what to do with that, but something interesting to think about is like, should we be making value judgments, and like what price do we have to pay for those, and like what's lost and what's gained?
I wonder if he was influenced by the Vienna Circle in any sort of way, or logical positivism. I mean, when he moved, again, I don't know when he wrote, but if he
Mm-hmm.
moved here in 1932, that is when the Vienna Circle is well, it's beginning to fade a little bit, but their influence was very, very strong. I don't know. When you said value judgments, I just thought of I just finished a book on them, so
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm all up on the logical positivists.
Let's see. This book, What is Political Philosophy, was published in 1957.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Well, speaking of someone who was also influenced by World War II, we can turn to John Rawls.
Mm-hmm.
He was born in 1921 and died in 2001. And he was a young man when the World War II happened. And
Mm-hmm.
that really influenced a lot of his thinking, especially around, well, what's interesting about John Rawls is when he was in Princeton, he was very interested in theology and religion. And his senior thesis was even, well, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's an aspect of philosophy of religion in support of Christian theistic view. And after World War II, especially after the dropping of the atomic bomb, he was stationed in the Atlantic and was part of McCarthy's invasion force. So he was kind of close to that
Oh,
action
really?
there. Anyway, he
Really
after
interesting.
that he came back and became an atheist and uh, but a lot of his writings against Pelagianism, which is the heresy of Christianity, influenced his most famous writing, the book called The Theory of Justice. And we need like a hammer drop here just because of how influential this work has been. This is a quote from Will Kilmlicka, who's a political philosopher in Canada. He said that a theory of justice is generally accepted that or let me restart this. He said, it's generally accepted that the recent rebirth of normative political philosophy began with the publication of John Rawls' Theory of Justice in 1971. So,
Hmm.
big piece of political philosophy that influences Nozick and a lot of other philosophers coming later. And the big news here is that he envisioned justice as fairness.
Yeah.
And so we'll look at some of the precepts of this book in a second, but that's the big thing to know. He thinks that fairness is the highest ideal of society, or societies that are formed together, and things like equal opportunity, equity, liberty. He even has a whole section about is the word economics, I guess, in a super fair system. And he's using a lot of these new tools that are revealed in the 20th century that a lot of philosophers use today, especially in political philosophy, like game theory and modern logic, which are incorporated in his book. But other things to know about his background was he was a philosopher at most of the big schools, similar to Lelio Strauss, but he's most famous as having his what's the word, tenure at not at Princeton, sorry, at Harvard.
Harvard.
So he was a big Harvard guy, very famously a big Harvard guy, and he won this. I forget the name of the prize, but this big philosophy prize in 2001. That's only released every 3 years, but anyway, he's a big, very famous guy.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to add, Taylor, before we move on to his philosophical ideas?
Nope, you got it.
All right, so just keep it in your background of your mind that this whole theory of justice is based around the concept of justice as fairness. And do we want to talk about that before we jump in? What do we think about that?
Well, I actually have a question about that.
Yeah.
Does he propose any other types of definitions for justice?
I don't think he proposes any other definitions. Do you remember any, Taylor?
No, I think it all is just kind of in that same vein as justice as fairness. And it may make more sense when we get into his thought problem that he sets up for us.
Yeah, I think that he's recommending this idea of justice as fairness. It's not necessarily saying there's a form of justice and that is fairness itself.
Yeah.
He's saying that a society should be a just society rather should be created in a way where justice is equivalent to fairness.
Yeah, that the fundamental agreements of the society are fair, that they're not setting already one group above another or disenfranchising somebody.
Yep.
And is this considered like the highest good or something like that when we're talking about forming governments?
Yeah, this would be like the best society.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like the one thing we should all appeal to, basically. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So he had this very famous thought experiment / idea, which his book is oriented around and that has influenced a lot of philosophy. It's called the original position, which is the idea that policymakers, when they're devising policy, should imagine a world separated from all of their identities and social conditions. So in a sense, and he doesn't imagine this as a real world, and this is important. He's just wanting policymakers to go behind what he calls a veil of ignorance. And this veil of ignorance is a hypothetical world where the body is disembodied from its physical features and language and all of these things. And could potentially go into any body in the world. I'm doing a really bad job of explaining this. But anyway,
Oh.
behind this veil of ignorance, like I said, the soul or whatever would be completely removed from your skin color, your socioeconomic status, your
Mm-hmm.
religious beliefs, if you're disabled, what kind of ability you have, whatever. And so the idea is that you need to create a policy where your policy should be created so that if you were placed into any body around the world, you would want to live in that body, basically. Taylor, do you have anything else to add or better explain?
I think you did a good job of it, that the original position is a position that nobody knows their position in society. You don't know if you're the highest or the lowest, if you're a man, if you're a woman, like what your economic status is, you don't know. And this is his maxi min solution. All of his stuff kind of links together in a way that
Yeah.
makes sense altogether, but if there's a piece missing, it doesn't, which I think is kind of the tricky part of it. But that you should evaluate a policy, like Andrew was saying, based on its impact to the lowest tier of society as well to maximize its utility, and like knowing what the worst outcome is, and the worst outcome should still be good.
Yeah, and also these policymakers, no matter like what hypothetically who they would be or whatever, that they would want to live in this society, even if they were at the very bottom. So, Mr. Parsons, I see you making some funny faces. What do you think about this?
I'm so self-conscious now that I see myself all the time. I make these scowling faces without even really meaning to. Okay. So this is if I'm understanding this correctly, which I think I am, this is really interesting, right? It's basically, well, okay. Let me use an example. Healthcare in the United States.
Mhm.
So members of Congress have healthcare, like the best healthcare you could possibly have. I can't remember what their policy is necessarily, or who it's through, or whatever. But like the healthcare you get if you're a policymaker in the United States is exceptional. At least the federal level is what I'm familiar with. And of course, we know that it seems like the medical, what I'm saying, the medical insurance industry in the United States is just in disarray and chaos, and cost is out of control, and all the stuff that goes along with that. And they're like, okay, well, why aren't these people who's making the policies about healthcare, why don't they have the same healthcare? Right. And I remember when
Mhm.
the Affordable Care Act came out, there were some politicians who were like, we're going to use the Affordable Care Act insurance because we should be using the same thing that people who the Affordable Care Act is for. Like, is that kind of like an example of what you're talking about?
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, but it would even extend past things like, well, I guess healthcare is a good example, but it would extend past things, especially into economic policies, which would affect
Mhm.
how you work. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted, for instance, to eliminate gas burner stoves, which I know is a big thing right now, and switch all to electric, where that's what a lot
Mm.
of people are saying is going to happen in New York, you would be like a coal worker whose family, or you need to think about the coal worker who's going to lose his job, who
Mm-hmm.
can't mine coal anymore, who's like 60 years old and has nothing left, or for any policy,
Mhm.
but not even just in the United States. It would extend across the world.
Sure.
Yeah, like you being some, I don't know. I don't want to make an example from that.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the principles of justice now, that he presents kind of two, three-ish principles of justice?
Yeah, we can do this if you. Yeah, let's just do it.
Okay.
So his
So,
book. Yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
oh no, you can go.
No, it's
Okay.
okay.
So he presents a couple of principles of justice as ways to kind of actualize or visualize how justice as fairness should be implemented into a regime or into the world. And the first one is the equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with similar liberty for others. So we should all have as much freedom as possible that doesn't impede on anybody else's. That it shouldn't be conflicting freedoms. Like your ability to express yourself shouldn't like reduce anybody else's.
That seems
And
like
then,
that would be awfully difficult.
yeah.
In practicality.
That's a big critique of all of Rawls.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
we'll
that
talk about
it's
that in a second.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And then the second one has to do with inequalities, and he splits it into two pieces, an A and a B, and says inequalities should be arranged so that A, they're reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage. This is his difference principle. And they're attached to positions that are open to everybody. And there's like fair and equal opportunity to achieving these positions.
So let's talk about maybe some criticisms of Rawls. Does anything jump out to you, Mr. Parsons? Can you expand upon your impracticality idea?
Well, I mean, it's all good and well. Actually, so last week I was going over just war theory with my
Mm-hmm.
students. And this one student, he was just so frustrated. He's like, none of this could actually happen. It's all
Mm-hmm.
also impractical. And, the other students were like, yes, but we need to have something to appeal to,
Mm-hmm.
and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of what immediately strikes me is like, yes, like I agree, like our freedom, shouldn't infringe on anyone else's freedom. Boy, we got some. I mean, you guys have obviously studied and I've not, but you seems like you'd have to get into definitions of exactly what we mean by when we say freedom. Does it apply to everything, like freedom of expression, freedom of property? I don't know. Am I on the right track for criticisms here?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, I
Andrew?
think I think that's a good criticism in the sense that it's very impractical, even in the sense of how could we even come to judge policies behind a
Mm-hmm.
veil of ignorance? We're tied so deeply to our identities and these things that it would just be impossible to really get behind. But I think that the basic idea of a veil of ignorance, something to consider, is interesting itself.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah. I like it as a thought to keep in mind, but it'd be really difficult and I don't know if it even be possible to actually implement, but like considering how a policy would impact like everyone throughout society and thinking about is this specifically designed to help one group and disadvantage another, and is that in a way that's increasing equality or decreasing equality is
Mm-hmm.
like I think an important thing to consider.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll offer one final criticism that I think is interesting. I think it's from Alistair McIntyre, Charles Taylor. I can't remember who. We've talked about McIntyre, I think, at this show, but he's a philosopher out of Notre Dame who I don't know how to describe him. He's a criticizer of modern ethics and reverts back to virtue ethics a lot. And Charles Taylor, who's a Canadian philosopher and sociologist who writes a lot about community. I can't remember which one, or they might have published together, but their criticism of John Locke is basically that it relies on an well, an overly individualistic view of human beings. And I think the idea is that humans aren't self-interested rational agents who make decisions basically only for themselves. Human beings have a natural connectedness to other people, their families, but also overall culture and history too. And so I think that that's their criticism against Rawls, that it's at least individualistic and forgets a lot of the historical and cultural context of humans. All right. Do you want to move on to Nozick, my favorite?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Oh god,
Nozick, he's so
this gonna be
fun.
big? Okay, I'm ready.
He's also kind of awful, but but he's awful in a funny way.
Awfully funny.
Well, yeah, but Nozick was a philosopher also at Harvard. He died in 2002, I think. I don't remember. I think I have the dates on the docs. I think it's 1938 to 2002. Yeah.
Yeah.
He also got his PhD in Princeton. He's a faculty member at Harvard. And so I think he's working pretty much just alongside of John Rawls. And he writes this book called uh, Anarchy State Utopia and Utopia is a direct response to John Rawls's work.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think it came out 4 years later in 1978, but I could be wrong about that.
I'm
Anyway.
very familiar with it's one of those titles that I just know. I'm very familiar with the title. I've never read it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge book. Both of them are really big books that no one should ever read. But it's it was also written in 1974. Interesting. Okay, so and it's been named as one of the most 100 influential books since the Second World War. So it's really, really big. Very influential, especially in like libertarian thought, I would say. And he's arguing in contrast from John Rawls, who might argue for a really controlling government, for the most minimal state that we could ever have. This is his quote. It should be a minimal state limited to the narrow functions of protection against force, theft, fraud, enforcement of contracts, and so on. So very, very limited government. We can't go over the whole book, of course, but here's some highlights. So he believes that all individuals have a right to life, liberty, property, and happiness. And he's kind of a descendant of John Locke, second treatise on government, which we talked about last time. That and a baby child of Kant. So he's thinking about these two together. So let me go over 3 theories from this book, or some things that he talks about that I thought were especially interesting. Okay, so first one, he believes in this idea called consensual slavery, where it's a thought experiment that he proposes. So here's the premise. Okay, 1, individuals have the right to self-ownership. 2, individuals have the right to enter into contracts. 3, a contract is valid if it is freely entered to and does not violate the rights of others. So that follows from 1 and 2. And so he wants us to imagine a person who's so impoverished that they would be willing to sell themselves into slavery in exchange for a guaranteed income and a secure place to live. And under John Rawls, this would be kind of an abhorrent position. You're giving up your own freedom and your own rights just for a guaranteed income that would be provided for probably by the government under Rawls. But would a Rawlsian person be free to enter into a contract where they would be able to sell themselves? No, probably not. I mean, that would be illegal and other things. But under Nozick, that is a thing that would be allowed, I think, from my understanding of Nozick, as long as it was freely entered and doesn't violate the rights of either party. So if one party is drunk or under the influence or being manipulated, that wouldn't be allowed. But so I think this is like a really interesting implication of his theory that he recognizes and kind of highlights. What do you all think about this? An idea of consensual slavery existing in a really free minimal government state.
Well, I don't know. You got something to say, Taylor?
If you have something, you can go first.
Okay. Well, first of all, would he be considered a libertarian?
Yep.
Okay.
But
that
like
tracks.
A really, 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 really libertarian, not like a
yeah.
current libertarian.
So this actually happened, in history. There's examples of this happening in history. certainly in the early years, decades of the United States, indentured servitude. People who wanted to escape Europe would do not have the money to do that, to buy a boat ticket and come on over. So they would sell themselves as slaves. Now, not like slaves as we think of like chattel slavery down the American South or something like that, but there were servants in these wealthy people's houses, which, by the way, was fairly common at that time. You know, wealthy people in England and France and other places had servants. So that, in a way, that's not like slavery. That has quite a bit of a different feel to it, but the concept is the same. These people gave up their freedom in order for a greater gain, which was to come over to the United States, work in these people's houses. And in some arrangements, you know, they would like work for 10 years or 15 years or something like that in exchange for, you know, housing, food, all that type of stuff. Then get on their feet. So, I mean, it's happened. It doesn't mean it's right, of course, but it's certainly happened. I'm sure there's plenty of other historical examples we could think of. That's not answering your question. That's just my reflections on it. That's just what I think of. I don't know. What you got, Taylor?
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about, I don't know, being able to sell yourself into slavery. I understand,
It
I guess.
seems very bad.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess in that, like, the particular situation Mr. Parsons brought up, like, if that's the way to a better life, or like historically, I understand. I don't know. I don't necessarily like it. That's just kind of my gut reaction of like, I don't like. I guess also that like there's a society where people would have to do that, like be in the position where it's either that or like worse suffering, like kind of choosing the lesser of two evils. I don't like that that would even be an option that people have, like that they have to be in. But I guess I don't know. It's kind of inescapable sometimes. Like I don't know.
Yeah. You know, for me too, when I just hear the word slavery,
Hmm.
I just have a reaction against it, and it's not
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah,
So, you know, that's kind of one problematic thing, at least from my particular perspective. I also kind of think like there's some responsibility here on the government's part. I realize he's
Yeah.
like a hyper libertarian, but you know, society should be able to, well, to be able to provide enough to prevent
Hmm.
a situation where a person needs to sell themselves into slavery.
Yeah.
But I guess Rawls probably, I mean, not Rawls, Nozick probably doesn't care about that.
yeah. Well, I didn't include it here, but I think it's important for us to raise. He has this very, very famous argument called the Wilt Chamberlain argument, which is so funny
I think I've heard of
because,
this.
yeah. So, sorry, there's a ambulance.
Uh-oh.
Okay,
It's
so
going down. All
yeah.
right.
Okay, so imagine a world where Wilt Chamberlain, who's in the time of the 1970s, was a great, great basketball player, and he's so popular that everyone in the society wants to watch him play. So Wilt Chamberlain, being a free actor, he decides that he's going to charge everyone who wants to watch him 25 cents each to watch him play basketball. So it makes sense that after a while, Wilt Chamberlain would become way richer than everyone else in the society because everybody's paying him 25 cents. If people are losing 25 cents, he's getting 25 cents every time he's playing from a lot of people. So he's going to be richer in society. So someone like Rawls would say, okay, this is naturally unfair because he has all the money, everyone else is struggling in society, hypothetically. And so isn't that unfair? So Nozick thinks that his wealth is not unfair because he earned his money in a voluntary transaction with people who freely chose to pay him and watch him play. And so Rawls might say, okay, or Marxists might say, isn't this taking advantage of people? Like you're just forcing people, well, not forcing people, but people have to pay you to play this game. Why can't you just play it without charging people? And so he says that, if an individual wants to transfer their own property to others, this would include charging people for their services. And so Rawls would classically say, okay, well, this is just going to create huge inequalities in a society between the rich and the poor, which is not something that's gone away since the 1970s. It's something that's even grown even more. But Nozick's big point here, and this is the point of the book, that justice, it's not about fairness. It's not even about achieving equality. Justice is about protecting individual rights,
Hmm.
which includes the right to acquire wealth through voluntary transactions. Uh, then so a criticism might be okay, but what if somebody doesn't have the talent or opportunity or the privileges of the society to earn money like Chamberlain, which is Rawls's point with the original position. Like people don't have the same opportunities to earn the money. Like I'm not 7 feet tall, might not be able to play in the NBA. Why is that fair that he can? So Nozick, he's what he wants to focus on in his theory of justice. It's not anything with social justice or fairness. It's about individual rights. That is what's key in a theory of justice. This challenges Rawls's theory of justice, of course, and I think about uh, many theories of justice in the 20th century, like Marxist. A big concept now going on is equity. And it you know, might not answer all our questions, but it definitely sets up this idea is that when we're thinking about fairness, we need to think about that in contrast to the idea of individual rights. And what are we preferring more in a theory of justice? So, what do you think about this concept?
Well, I think Wilt Chamberlain needs to pay taxes. No, I do. I mean, we can make the same argument about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and whatever
Yeah,
today. But I mean,
Yeah.
I get where he's coming from.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
let me explain this real quick. So, in Nozick's ideal world, basically governments would be privatized organizations, which you have to pay a fee in to enter in for their security.
Is this guy
and
like Ayn Rand 2.0 or something? Like,
uh,
anyway, sorry.
but that's
Continue.
the extension of a super libertarian
Oh yeah.
principle. And so the
Mm-hmm.
idea is that most people would be willing to pay for a form of government which not only protects their rights to the fullest extent of the law, but also will provide them the most fairness and opportunity. Does that make sense? So there should be
Yeah.
one overall government which makes sure that these individual privatized players are playing by the rules, not stumping on people's individual rights. But beyond that, it's up to the private organizations to provide security, you know, as much freedom as possible, whatever.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
What do you think, Taylor? Sorry.
I don't know. I think in some ways I find it interesting. I'll say that. And like the individual freedoms should be protected, but I don't know, like the example that you gave of the thought experiment. I find kind of interesting of like I think yes, if it's some sort of service or action, people should be able to charge for that, but maybe the implications like to the furthest extreme. I don't know about like if the furthest extreme of that is like indentured servitude. I don't know. I think it works well maybe in the middle of like if you think a concert, like selling tickets for a concert, they can be really expensive, but you're paying to see an artist in like their talents and their abilities and their time and all of the things that go into a concert. It makes sense that it'd be expensive and then you have, musicians that make a lot of money off of touring. And I think that makes sense, but I don't know about the extreme if I would agree with that. I don't
I think the extreme is just an example of in a society where individual rights are key, we would have the right to do something like sell ourselves into slavery.
Would that not violate your individual rights though by like selling your like being sold into slavery even if it's by yourself like then you are losing rights?
Well, if you were a rational actor who could enter into an agreement with someone else willingly to give away your rights, that would be your individual right to choose to give away that individual right. And you're also getting money, you're also getting healthcare and benefits and nice sleepy facilities. I don't know what that would look like, but yeah,
I
it's
mean,
really no different than
this
now.
type of slavery sounds fantastic. I suppose I suppose it's like the type of slavery we're talking about too. That what you just described sounds like a nice vacation.
Well, I think I think what's really interesting here is saying that, okay, if we want to have a system like Rawls, that's fine. We can do it. But we have to recognize first that that would be something that would be an individual right that someone should enter into first.
So does he believe in inalienable rights?
No, he does
No.
not believe
Okay,
in
so rights
inalienable
given by
rights.
a government.
He
Oh.
no, actually, I think he does believe in unalienable rights, but
Yeah,
it's
because I was
kind
gonna
of
say if it's a government that's granting you those rights, and the government's incredibly limited, then it has really no place to interfere. And I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Like if a person has inalienable rights, I guess you could say it is theirs to give away.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's all wealth distribution. It's
Yeah.
something we study a lot in ethics for sure. Applied ethics.
yeah. I think Nozick on this point is really a little bit vague, but he definitely believes that we have some natural rights, but he also
Mm-hmm.
believes these rights can be transferable, which is
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
point behind his slavery point.
I
So
mean,
if
can
they're
you transfer an
transferable,
inalienable right?
yeah, that's why there's a
Yeah.
little bit vague.
I guess maybe that's what I was getting at. Yeah. Like you can't, I don't know. Like you can't give away something that
Mm-hmm.
is inherently yours, like essentially.
Well,
Yeah.
I think you can.
Okay.
Like, I could imagine a situation where I can give away my organs for a cost. Like, do I need two kidneys?
No.
No.
I could sell one. That's
Yeah,
something
you
that's
could.
naturally part of myself, but I
That's
could
true.
do it for money.
That's true.
Yeah.
But is it essentially part of you?
I
Because I
don't
feel
think
like there's
rights
a
would have to be
difference.
essentially a part of us.
Isn't that what an unalienable right is, though? Like, it's an essential and, like,
It would be a,
inseparable facet of humanity?
but you can repress somebody's right to freedom, like a North
I
Korean regime.
suppose.
Sure.
Mm.
And, in our own country, our justice system, we take away people's rights. But that's because they violated the agreed upon code.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's all very interesting. I've never
Mm-hmm.
studied Nozick's
Yeah, I haven't
political
either.
philosophy. This is fascinating. I think I told you guys earlier in the week, like the only thing I know Nozick for is his pleasure machine thought experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So this has just been very, very intriguing to me.
Yeah.
That pleasure machine comes in that book is in that book. Andrew, do you know how it fits in with that book? Like where and how?
No, I've never read that whole book. I've read parts.
Yeah, it's always used for like thought experiments about consciousness and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that, which has nothing to do with political philosophy, but I know it comes from
Yeah.
that book.
Andrew, do you know if Nozick talks about Sandel or like Sandel's ideas anywhere? Because he was also a Harvard professor that refuted Rawls, and that was like his big thing.
No,
Is
I
that he
don't know.
argued
I'm
against Rawls?
familiar with him, but I don't know, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I think it's really interesting though that we're finally seeing, after 71 episodes, American philosophers who are door next door to each other arguing completely different points. It
Mm-hmm.
is something beautiful about American philosophy.
Yeah. And I think, at least in the case of Rawls and Sandel, they were like friendly and like may have had like a friendship relationship outside of academia, but they had these like drastically opposing views, but they were still like colleagues and got along in their like real on the ground lives.
Yeah, I always like it when that happens too. There's two guys. Philip Goff and Keith
Mhm.
Frankish consciousness philosophers. Totally in opposition to each other, but they're like friends, and they even have a
Yeah.
podcast together, which is funny.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about philosophy.
Okay, I think
All
we're
right.
done. We done?
Yeah, I don't think we have anything more to say.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was a great one, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I learned some things today. Yeah, political philosophy is, as they say,
Mhm.
not my area, and so that was really fascinating. Well, Andrew, thank you for joining us from afar, being on the road,
Yes.
especially with your congestion. Everyone else, thank you for listening. We always enjoy that you do. Pass us along to all your friends and neighbors and everyone else. Like and subscribe, etc., etc. Taylor, tell us about that.
Yeah, like we said at the beginning of the episode, we would love it if you would subscribe on our YouTube channel, if you would leave a comment. YouTube, Andrew reads through a lot of those and he'll get back to you if you comment there. Or you can email us at contact@opendoorphilosophy.com or message us on Instagram and I will get back to you there. Any of those places are great if you have a question, if you have a topic that you're like, what do y'all think about this? We can definitely add it to our growing list of topics we want to cover and make an episode about that. We made an episode of listener questions in the past, so we would love to do that. If you have thoughts on this episode, let us know. You can do that anywhere that you access the episode, on the post, on the YouTube channel, any of those places. And yeah, I'll pass it to Andrew.
And I think in about maybe a month. I think maybe a month from now we'll have an episode of just for listener questions and books. So if you have any of those, send those in the next few weeks. I think that's it. Anything else, guys?
I'm good, man. It's Thanksgiving break. Woo!
Yes.
Yeah, I wish I had ChatGPT write us a turkey pun. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, if your life is in need of some philosophy, the door is always open. Thanks, guys.
Thank you
Bye.
much. Thank you much? Is that a thing I say?